Hello everyone and welcome to Module 10 Video 2. In this video we're going to talk mostly about ethics and a little bit about applying heathenry to your lifestyle in different ways to do like hobbies and environmentalism and things like that. So let's talk about ethics. So what is ethics? It's really all about our character and how we make choices about moral issues. It's talking about what is right, what is wrong, okay? And there are lots of different types of theories of ethics. Throughout history, philosophers have come up with different ways of looking at it. We're going to focus particularly on virtue ethics in here. But I want to just talk very quickly about the different types of ethics that different philosophers have talked about, okay, or the different types of ethical systems. So one of them is consequentialism. Okay, and that basically says it's the consequences of our actions that should be the basis of deciding what's right and wrong. So in other words, it doesn't matter what our motivation is or anything like that. The key question is, what is the consequence of our action? Okay. And then on the opposite side of that is deontology. Okay, the deontological moral system. And this one says you should act in a way that is morally right regardless of the consequences. So it's the opposite, basically saying that your motive is the key thing to whether something's morally right or not. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. What matters is whether you had the right motive. Then you've got hedonism. Okay, in hedonism, it says essentially we should seek to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. You can also call this like egoism and stuff like that. It would be focusing on what's good for you and what minimizes your pain. And then taking this further, there's something called utilitarianism, which basically brings hedonism up to a society level and says the aim of the action should be to maximize the positive effect, so the happiness of most people. So what is morally right is what maximizes happiness in a society, what minimizes suffering in society. Okay. Then you've got the idea of divine command. And this is something that many of the religions teach, like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and so on. And they say basically an action is morally right because a deity commanded it's right. So if you think about the 10 Commandments and things like that, okay. So that's sort of the main theories of ethics, okay, other than virtue ethics, which we're going to come on to in a second. Then you've also got Jonathan Haidt. He's wrote a really good book about morals and right and wrong. And he says, and basically, and politics, basically. And he talks about 6 moral foundations around which people look at their morality, what is right and what is wrong. So you've got a care or harm foundation. You've got a fairness and cheating foundation. You've got a loyalty and betrayal foundation. You've got an authority or subversion foundation. You've got a sanctity versus degradation foundation. And you've got a liberty and oppression foundation. Okay. And these foundations suggest where our feelings about certain moral issues come from. Okay, they're like sort of innate psychological systems. And what he argues basically is that from a political perspective, whether you're right wing or left wing, will depend on which of these particular foundations you focus on more. So sort of the care, harm, and the liberty, oppression, they're more, maybe it's the fairness and cheating, they're more of the sort of focused on by the left, whereas the right tend to focus on all 6 equally. And that's why you've got very different approaches and different ideas about what is right and wrong, depending on where someone sits on the political spectrum. And they're saying basically this is some sort of innate thing, and by understanding this, it helps you to understand other people. Basically, is what his argument is. So yeah, that's lots of different ethical ideas. The one I want to focus most on, though, is virtue ethics. Okay, this is the focus on developing good inner character. In other words, the virtues. Okay, so that then you naturally act according to them in daily life. So it emphasizes more principles and ideas rather than strict rules. So you might say the emphasis on wisdom or generosity or honor or courage. Okay, it's usually those sorts of things, not you shall not kill or you shall not lie or things like that. Okay, so it's an overall virtue that you're trying to develop within yourself, within your character, and then when you've developed that within your character, you will naturally express that out to others in your day-to-day life. So if we look at something like Aristotle or even Confucius in China, the idea here is that the virtues are usually a midway point between two contrasting other virtues or vices. Okay, so if you look at, say, courage, it's the midpoint between recklessness and cowardice. Okay, the midpoint of that is courage, and that is the ethical standard that you want to aim for. Okay, and you also see this many times in our Heathenry. So Heathenry talks a lot about moderation, for example, and talking about being hospitable, but also be wary that when you walk through a door of a new place, in case someone's waiting to kill you. It talks about having some drink but not getting drunk, and things like that. So we can see this in the Heathenry, we can see this in Aristotle, and Aristotle was from a pagan culture as well. He was a pagan, so it's a theory that has come out of paganism. Okay, and so it probably fits well with paganism nowadays as well. Okay, and that's why I've chosen to focus on this as the foundation of our ethical system. And you'll find that a lot of heathens and a lot of pagans would agree with this idea. Okay, so let's have a think about where we get our ethics from, what sources. So we can look to the past. That's one option. So pagan and heathen sources might include virtue ethics, or called thews. Okay, now these are character traits or customs and habits, or ideals or practices that you try to live up to. Okay, in modern times, we've got a couple of examples here. The 9 noble virtues, you've probably heard about that. Actually, this does not have a lot of historical accuracy in it. It's more Protestant American values turned into a list of 9 words. It's developed more from those on the far right, really. So I would avoid trying to bring your values from there, and instead actually look at the historic lore and the historic texts to come up with what your values and virtues are. Then in the Anglo-Saxon community, you've got the 3 winds. In other words, using the W, basically. So it's wisdom, worth mind, which is like honor, and wealth deal, which means generosity. So wisdom, honor, and generosity become the 3 ones there. A really popular way of getting your ethics in modern times is the Heathenry. That's full of lots of different proverbs. You can find lots of virtue ethics within it, and lots of just wisdom and life advice. So that's a really popular one. Another thing you could do is look at the heroic tales, things like Beowulf, for inspiration from there. The Vikings, they had warband codes, like the Jomsvikings code, or the Orvar Odd Saga, or Halfsaga of Halfrithreca. These are not that relevant really for modern times unless you're a soldier, but they are good for inspiration, okay, because they do emphasize important virtues like courage and loyalty and not attacking the vulnerable in society. Okay, you could look at the sagas, see what they have. So Icelandic children, they used to grow up hearing the saga stories, and then people talked about the actions of the characters and their ethics. And stories are important because stories are a way in which we pass on our ethics to the next generation. It's how kids learn what is good, what's bad, what's morally right and wrong. Think about something like Aesop's fables from the Greeks. It was a way of teaching particular moral values. Okay. Then you could look at heathen law codes and lore. Look at the Tacitus Germania or the 9th century Anglo-Saxon precepts. These things outline different ideas that you can use for your morals and ethics. You could look at the commands of the gods. Okay, now there's not so much of that within heathenry, but you do find that in other religions. There are, however, examples in the lore of gods punishing those who don't live up to heathen virtues. Okay, if you don't live up to hospitality and things like that, or you break oaths or things like that, there are punishments from the gods for that. You can also look for inspiration from the actual character of the gods themselves. So think about Tyr. Tyr was willing to put his hand into a wolf's mouth, knowing he was going to have the wolf bite his hand off, in order to protect the universe, basically, from Heathenry destroying it. Okay, so self-sacrifice. You've got Thor, who was always about protecting his community, protecting his family, protecting the world and the earth. Okay, so protection. You've got Odin, who's constantly on the search for wisdom. So this suggests a lot of ethics can be found in the way the characters of the gods act. Okay, be aware though that the gods do not always act in a ethical way. Okay, they are not at least the way they're presented in the text, they are not perfect, upright, moral beings. Okay, Odin is often seen as untrustworthy. He will break oaths. He rapes people. Freyr, in order to get Gerther to marry him, threatens to curse her and with all these horrible things unless she marries him. So the gods don't always act in a very moral way, and therefore, while you can take some moral guidance from them, do not try to base your character completely on everything they do, because not all of it is ethical. Okay, the key thing is exercising your judgment. Okay, just because something was considered ethical or acceptable in the past, or just because the gods did something in the myths, does not mean we should condone it today. Slavery, rape, animal and human sacrifices, these sorts of things, breaking oaths, all that sort of stuff. This is not acceptable nowadays. Okay, so you need to exercise judgment and wisdom. But also, we shouldn't just dismiss things just because they're not modern. Okay, it's about this judgment thing. We also need to remember that we could look at modern ethics and philosophy basically for ideas. So you could look back at the things like the deontology and the utilitarianism and stuff like that, which have been developed through the centuries, and maybe those are ways to, or ideas that are inspiring you when you're making philosophical, ethical decisions. But remember, we're modern people. We're not members of an ancient tribe, so we don't have to adopt all the ancient ideas. We can adopt modern ideas too. Okay, and also just be aware that many ancient pagan societies developed the sophisticated systems of ethics. So these are all worth exploring. We talked about Aristotle and virtue ethics. He's written an entire book called Nicomachean Ethics, which is well worth a read. Okay, it gives you quite a substantial and deep way of looking at ethics. You could look at Confucius and his Analects and his system. And he, again, is over time, they've developed a very detailed system that will probably work within a heathen context as well. A lot of focus on family and ritual propriety and things like that. So these are systems that you can look at to try and get what you think is the ethical system for you. And if you're really interested in the virtue ethics, I definitely recommend reading Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Okay, so let's have a look a bit about the context of the society that they were living in. Okay, and this is particularly the Viking Age and the Migration Age. Okay, so heathen lived in societies that classed as the heroic society. Okay, this is a very different type of society to ours. Okay, they have chiefdoms of a clan or a tribe, so they're in small groups. Basically, they're living together in small groups, and these chiefs were usually the head of families. Okay, so it might be a very big extended clan of family is the tribe, and the head of that family is the chief. But they did also have complex legal codes. So they had the Althing, which is like a parliament or a court, where usually the chief was the head of that, but then you'd also have all the sort of free members of society would also take part, particularly the males. Chieftains often got to their position through a variety of means. It could just be where they were in the family, but also charisma. Winning battles was important for that. And they have a role of distributing the tribe's goods. Okay, they were also ruling on matters of justice and commanding the warriors. And if a harvest was bad, or they were very stingy rather than generous, they could very easily lose their position. So they would fight battles with their warriors, and then they'd often redistribute their goods to their warriors in order to get the warriors to be loyal to them. Okay. They were very oral societies. So there was a lot of storytelling and poetry. That was really important because it preserved their history and their lore and their laws and everything. Okay. It was a very different time when there was lots of war. There was warriors fighting. There were blood feuds going on. They were an important part of society. The upper class of society was a warrior class. They had feasting halls. Now, this was for community get-together, for feasting, for sharing out foods, sharing out the goods, sharing out the spoils of war, that sort of thing. Okay, and also for the community to come together. The world outside, it was seen as turbulent and dangerous and inhabited by many different spirits. And death could happen really at any time because it wasn't like the modern world, obviously. People had low life expectancies and death was always at the door. So things are transient and they're constantly changing. And the world itself is governed by a force of fate. Now, this is not a force that's a good, positive force where if you're good, you get good things. If you're bad, you get bad things. No, this is not necessarily fair. Okay. It's fatalistic. They were a fatalistic society that believed that fate determined their destiny, ultimately. And even the gods themselves are subject to fate. Okay. They responded to this fate with magic. So they would do divination, for instance, to tell the future so they could work out what was going to happen. Okay. Social bonds were really important because they were not just making obviously people happier and life better and things like that, but they were protection against what fate dealt against you. Okay. And importantly, they weren't individualists. Okay. Identity was very much social. So your social place, your social function constitutes your identity. You have a particular place in the social order, and it's important to understand what you owe to others and what they owe you in society. Okay, it was very much you have a place in society that you stick to, and that's your identity. Okay, and it's made up of bonds of obligation to others and others to you. And morality was not really about you. Ethics, morality, it was more social. It was about how you interact with the rest of society. That was the standard for whether something was right or wrong. That said, people did want personal honor, personal glory, okay, but also family honor and family glory, okay? And particularly that meant fame that outlasted death. If you were a warrior, that was really important. You wanted glory and fame that would outlast your death because you're probably going to die quite young, okay? But they also believed that risk of death is no reason to shirk from action. Okay, death was unavoidable. Fate was going to get you in the end. But you try to meet death bravely as like a last stand. Okay, you would accept your fate, you would accept death, but you would take a stand and be courageous and stuff like that. Okay, so how you died was important. Now, the family is really important, okay? And Dr. Prisca Augustine looks at the Germanic culture, the book called The Semiotics of Fate, Death and Soul in Germanic Culture, and talks about the family. She talks about something called the sib, okay? So the sib is that which is one's own or familiar, the community of free individuals, either blood-related or related through marriage. So that's either your family or your extended family, basically. And the human being exists and acts only as a member of the sib, not as an independent individual. So this comes back to this morality is social thing. Okay. and that you exist within a place in society. You have your identity is based on your place within society in New Order. So the importance of the Sib is reflected in manifold acts of vengeance in the old sagas and epics, where it is not the specific individual that is sought out for revenge, but any member of that Sib. Okay, the individual gains identity by belonging to that Sib, which guarantees peaceful existence in this world. Not only is membership in the Sib the fundamental requirement for legitimate existence in Germanic society, but to be excluded is the equivalent of death. Okay. That's why things like exile were so bad as a punishment, because you were no longer basically you were no longer a human being, you're no longer a person, because you were no longer part of this family, this Sib. The significance of the Sib as a source of protection, peace, and rightful existence transcends the visible world, and by a unifying principle, the Sib includes the dead and the unborn. Okay, so it's saying basically, it wasn't just the living people; it's also the dead and the yet to be born. They're also part of this this Sib, this continuum, this society that gives people meaning and identity. In other words, the Sib has a transcendental meaning through a continuity of being, and at the same time establishes the boundary between internal and external. Okay, this is the idea that everything outside the Sib is the Utengar, the external, and everything inside is the internal, the Innengarth. So family was an important part of the ethics and the way people saw their world in the heathen times. Okay. So let's now look at the foundations of heathen ethics. Okay. A key one is interconnectedness. And this comes back to the idea of the web of weird, okay, which we've talked about before, but essentially it's a web that connects everything. It's all the threads of every action. Every action creates a thread, and then all these threads are intertwined. And when something happens on one, it affects lots of others, and something happening over there will affect you over here, and things like that. Okay, so the web of weird was the way that heathens conceived of how fate and life weave everyone and everything together. We're all part of the same whole. Okay, so we're all interconnected. What we do affects others, what they do affects us. And therefore that has ethical implications. Okay, so this is what Nordvig, Matthias Nordvig said. Now, this is also all about bonds. Okay, the gods are called Holt, those who bind. Okay, Odin is called Haptagoth, the god who binds. So he and the other gods bind the world in a fated, bonded community. Okay. These bonds are really important. The bonds of the web of weird, the threads connecting everything together, are really important. And it's part of the god's job to do that by the evidence we've got, as well as the norms as well. And when the bonds break, that's when you see Ragnarok happen. Okay, so the end of the world, the destruction of everything comes when these bonds break. That's why the bonds are so important. So everything and everyone is interconnected. They're bound together, and they're bound also to the gods and spirits. Okay. That means basically that every action we take affects others, and their actions affect us. So our actions have direct implications for everyone and everything else. No one is some sort of island on their own. Okay. There is a ripple effect, a butterfly effect. If you've heard of the thing where a butterfly in South America flies its wings, and in Europe or Asia, you suddenly get a hurricane, that sort of thing. It's everything you do has an effect on others. And that's a foundation of the ethics of heathens, particularly in the modern world. In addition, your deeds also place layers down in the well of weird. Okay. Now, the idea here is that you start out with layers put down in the well of weird by the norns, and then your actions and your deeds gradually build on those. Okay, and who we are today, the actions we do today affect the future. They affect who we become in the future, because the well of weird represents essentially the past, the present, and the future. Okay, so you're laying down these layers, which then determine what happens in the future, who you are in the future, etc. So it's really important as a heathen that we always consider our actions. Okay, and this is sort of the counterbalance to the idea on virtue ethics. Okay, because virtue ethics can be a very individualistic approach. It can be a very what am I like? What's my character? What am I doing? But actually, in heathen times, those who lived only for themselves were usually outlaws, and they just didn't last very long. Okay, they were exiled, and usually they were dead very soon because you didn't have the community support and protection with you. Okay, so virtue ethics needs to be looked at within a framework of society and community, okay, and other people. Life then was focused on the community. They lived basically in a web of mutual obligations and mutual benefits. And people really were completely reliant on their family and their community for survival. Okay, so we need to be aware of this. Ethics essentially are there to help us build this community. Okay, it's always about community-based ethics. Okay, this interconnectedness, this web of weird, this community. Okay, so that's to remember that as we're going through the rest of these ethics stuff now. So, what are examples of heathen virtues, heathen ethics? We've got something called frith, which we'll explain in a minute. Honor, hospitality, generosity, wisdom, friendship, moderation, courage, loyalty, the keeping of oaths, caring for nature. Okay, there's loads of different ethics. These are just some of them, okay? And I would suggest that it's a good idea for you to create your own ethical code. Go back to those sources that we suggested looking at and come up with a list of ethics that you think are most important. In this video, we're going to talk about some of them, okay? Not all of them, but some of them. And hopefully that will give you a foundation point to sort of explore and build your own code of ethics. So, frith. What is frith? This is not a word we really use today. Okay, it's not the easiest thing to get your head around. Okay, but ultimately it's a community-based ethic, the ultimate community-based ethic, and it's only possible in community. Okay. So Bosworth Toller Dictionary, that's the Anglo-Saxon dictionary, basically calls it peace, freedom from molestation, security guaranteed by law to those under special protection. And it seems to have been used for the king's peace or protection in general, and to be the right of all within the power of the law. So it's your peace, your freedoms, your security within community, within the law. Okay. The concise Anglo-Saxon dictionary calls it peace, tranquility, security, refuge, to make peace, privilege of special protection. Your peace, your security, your protection, your tranquility, your refuge when you're in that community. It's basically a state of peace and security, okay, within a group. So when you're in your heathen kindreds, your heathen groups, you want there to be maintaining a state of frith, a state of peace and security. Okay, and in modern heathenry, though, it sort of expands a bit more. It's seen as encompassing the obligations and actions that are required for that peace to exist. So D.H. Green calls it the state or condition prevailing amongst those who regard each other as their own kindred. Okay, it includes a sense of sort of mutual obligations to each other's well-being. So it's not just that you're enjoying peace and protection. It's also that you've got obligations to others' well-being to ensure they have frith, they have peace and protection. Okay, and it's that bond where everyone in the group is all trying to help each other, or has obligations to each other, or trying to ensure there's peace and security for each other. It means that you're not fighting, arguing, bickering, breaking down community rivalries between members of the group, all that sort of stuff. That stuff should not be there in a frith community, okay, a community that has frith. It's about getting on with each other. It's about supporting each other. It's about being peaceful and secure, okay. The Urban Dictionary includes, it is the obligation to one's community, friends, and family to consider their welfare in your actions and not to set out to harm them. Okay, so you're always, when you're in the state of frith, as a group, you're always looking out for each other. You're always trying to benefit your family, your friends, your community, each other, basically, their welfare. Okay. And so in heathenry, it's really important that you try to maintain frith. Okay. You're expected to ensure that there's frith within and among members of the group. Okay. If there's not frith, community isn't going to last very long. All right. And ensure in a modern heathen group, a kindred or something, it's one of the most important ethical values to follow. Okay. Okay, so that's frith. Let's talk about honor. So honor was an individual's greatest possession. But again, there's going to be a community side to this as well. Okay. So, for instance, for a lot of people, they would rather die than do something shameful. In Beowulf, it says, death is better for any warrior than a shameful life. Okay. The Norse word for this is troth, which means honor, trust, loyalty, and it's related to the English word for truth. Okay. So you're being loyal, you're being trustworthy, you're going to be reliable, you're being honest. That's what it means to be honorable. And also you keep your word or your promises. Okay. Because your word is your bond, essentially. But it's also social and public. Okay. Honor is not something. So in modern days, honor is very much about, am I living up to my internal code of ethics? Okay. That's what a modern version of honor is. But actually, in the past, that wasn't the case. Honor is something that's given to you by society. It's your reputation, your face, your good name, your how you're seen by others. Are you living up to what you've said you're going to live up to? It's your reputation, basically. And reputation is actually still important in modern heathenry as well. If you look at the Heathenry, it says, I know one thing which never dies, the reputation of each dead man. So the only thing that we know survives when you die, for sure, is your reputation. Okay, were you a good person? Were you a bad person? Did you live with honor or did you not? Okay, did you have a good reputation, a good name, or not? And it's more than just ordinary respect. Okay, it's something deeper, bigger than that. Okay. And it's not just about you. As we said, this is about community. So it's not just your personal honor, it's also your family or your group's honor that you have to uphold. Okay. If you do dishonorable actions, you bring dishonor not just on yourself, but on your friends and family too. If you, for instance, I don't know, if a kid murders someone, then people will say, well, their family was bad as well because they brought them up badly. Or their friends had a bad influence on them and things like that. So your dishonorable bad actions will dishonor your friends and family too. So you need to be considerate not just your own reputation and honor, but the reputation of your family and the groups you're part of, your friends and stuff. And you gain more honor through your actions. So when you're generous, when you're courageous, when you're loyal, when you're trustworthy, when you keep your word and your promises, when you do things that are good for society, for others, when you keep your word and you live up to a moral code, all these things bring honor to you in others' eyes. Okay. And another definition, it is the quality that disposes one to act in ways that earn the praise of others. It serves to strengthen and reinforce the social bonds which are at the foundation of all ethical norms in heroic societies, and even the foundation of personal identity itself. Okay, so ethics, honor in particular, it strengthens and reinforces social bonds. It's the foundation of ethical norms, and even your personal identity is based on whether you have honor or not. Okay, if you're an honorable person, and society has given you that honorable reputation. Okay, it's hierarchical. Okay, now I know a lot of people nowadays don't like the idea of hierarchy, but actually honor is hierarchical. Okay, and it was in the past. It's about behaving in the way that's suitable to your role or station in life. Okay, depending on what you roles you have in life, you should be acting based on those roles. Okay. Warriors in particular, it was really important for warriors, and this is probably why it's called a heroic society, why honor is such important, is because of the impact of the warrior society. So warriors had to fight for both their chieftain's honor and their own. Okay, so it's not just their own honor, they're worried about their chieftain as well. And you'll find that in a lot of heathen texts, that a chieftain's honor was also important. So loyalty to the chief and the kin is an important part of honor. Okay, being loyal to, so this is again hierarchy, being loyal to whoever your chief was, and your kin and family. Honor is also earned and tied to personal worth. Okay, so honor is about the value you bring to the community. That's where you start to get honor from, a reputation, a good name. But honor is also about excellence. It's about trying to strive to be excellent in whatever you do. Okay, that brings honor. And fate gives us gifts. It gives us circumstances. And what we do with those things is what brings us honor and praise or not. How we decide to react and act in situations is what will bring us honor and praise. Okay. And Matthias Norvig says, many people mistakenly believe that the way the ancient Vikings of the saga literature handled their feuds and fights was honorable. However, what the Icelandic sagas teach us is that the blood feuds of ancient times were stupid and wasteful. It is the person who is reluctant to start a feud who is the hero of any saga. So it's important to take that on board, because there are a lot of people today who see honor as something which you have to defend against little slights, basically. And this is Matthias Norvig. He is saying here that actually the sagas are teaching the opposite thing. They're teaching that when someone is having a feud or a fight, and it extends then to all their family, and then it's just back and forth, killing and killing and killing constantly, that's actually not a good thing. It's stupid and wasteful, basically. And basically the person who doesn't start the feud is the hero, or refuses to get involved in the feud is the hero. Okay. So trying to find a way around the arguments and the feuds and all that sort of stuff is the way to go in order to maintain honor. Okay, hospitality and generosity. Now, we've talked about hospitality as the foundational principle of our religious practice. Okay, particularly hospitality to the gods and the spirits. Okay, it is the underlying theological idea, moral idea, ethical idea of everything. We basically are hosting the gods, and they are our guests, and we treat them as guests, and we give them gifts, and it's all about hospitality. Okay, so that is why it's important. Also, Odin, he sometimes wanders the earth and tests people's hospitality. He might be a stranger that comes to someone's door, testing to see will they let him in, will they give him the right food and follow the right laws in hospitality. There is a hospitality law actually in Tacitus Germania. It says, no nation indulges more profusely in entertainment and hospitality. To exclude any human being from their roof is thought impious, i.e. disrespectful to the gods. Every German, according to his means, receives his guest with a well-furnished table. So that according to his means. So it doesn't mean you go like you get into debt and all this to try and please someone. It's you treat the guests as well as you can based on your means. Okay. And they're saying basically it's against the gods. Okay, it's impious if you don't act hospitably to people. When we do ritual, we are literally hosting the gods. We are guests. We have to treat them with the rules of hospitality. And the sacred meal at the center of a ritual is all about sharing with the gods and with the community. Okay, not just the gods, but also the community as well. Okay, so often some of the sacrifice itself is distributed to the poor. So Ibn Fadlan talks about this, and Yaqub al-Tartushi also talks about this. They talk about there being a sacrifice, and then the food is then given out to the community, especially to the poor. Okay, so hospitality, generosity in this case is important here. You've got Havamal, which says, "Blessed be the givers, a guest has come in. Where is he going to sit? Fire is needful for someone who's come in. Food and clothing are necessary for the man who's journeyed. Water is needful for someone who comes to a meal. A towel and a warm welcome, a friendly disposition." Okay, and so that's talking about the importance of hospitality. Okay, and then later in Havamal, it talks about generosity. It says, "With weapons and gifts, friends should gladden one another. Mutual givers and receivers are friends for longest. To his friend, a man should be a friend and repay gifts with gifts. You should mix your soul with his and exchange gifts." Okay, and generous and brave men live the best. Okay, so this is saying really generosity is a really important ethical principle here as well. And a man need not give only a big gift. Often you buy praise with a little. With half a loaf and a tilted cup, I've got myself a companion. Okay, so this is saying you don't need to give big gifts to be generous. You can give small gifts, okay, and that will still show that you're gift giving, you're generous. Now, kings and chieftains, they really did have to be quite generous, okay, to get their warriors to be loyal to them and to stop them getting a reputation of being stingy. Okay, so they give lots of the gifts of the war spoils that they get to their warriors. Okay, Beowulf, for instance, is particularly praised for his generosity because of this. And if they don't, then they risk getting removed from power. Poets, when they want to undermine a king's, would often call them stingy because that's one of the worst insults you could make to a king in that age. And just remember also that when it comes to hospitality and generosity, sharing and gift giving is what builds relationship and community. Okay. Okay. Now let's explore oaths. Keeping oaths was really important in ancient heathenry. Okay, oaths are seen as something sacred. Okay, they are a way of binding people together in a common cause or a relationship. So you think about your marriage oath. Okay, when you get married and you say your vows, that's bringing people together. It's binding people together. Warriors would make an oath to their chieftain. Okay, and this was a way of binding and loyalty between the warrior and the chieftain. You'd have a blood brotherhood oath, okay, where people would swear blood brotherhood with each other, and then that binds them together almost as an actual family, as an actual brothers. You've got oaths of peace between two kings when they want to make peace. By doing an oath, it makes it a sacred thing, okay. Now, oaths could be sworn on various objects. You've got the sonargolter, which is the boar that's an oath is sworn on at Yule. Normally, this is sort of the precursor maybe to New Year's resolutions, because you're making an oath of what you're going to do in the next year. They have arm rings called oath rings. These are not small little rings. These are sort of big ones that you put on your arm, just as you can see in the picture there. They would make oaths on swords. They would make oaths on stones and staffs on rivers. And in fact, actually, on the arm rings, they would even have an oath arm ring that sits on your altar in a temple as well. And this oath ring is worn by the Gothi on public occasions. So in Eyrbyggja Saga 4, Kjalna Singa Saga 2, it talks about the oath ring on the altar in Thor's temple. The oath ring has to be dipped in sacrificial blood in Viga Glum Saga. And according to the Icelandic Ulfslots law, temple oath rings were sworn on the name of the gods before any legal proceedings. Okay, so it shows how important they are from a legal perspective, in fact, even. You've got Germanic law codes, where you have to swear oaths at the thing when there were legal proceedings. Okay, so there's oath. The thing is the sort of parliament or courtroom. You've got the Vikings swearing an oath to King Alfred on a sacred ring, and this is mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So again, this is a oath on a ring. You've got Germanic people swearing oaths on a ring set into a sword. Okay, this is what H.R. Ellis Davidson talks about in Swords in Anglo-Saxon England. Warriors swore oaths on the king's sword often. Okay, Gesta Danorum Book 2, that's the Saxo, it says, for in old times, those who were about to put themselves in dependence on the king used to promise fealty by touching the hilt of the sword. Okay, so they would swear an oath by touching a sword. Germanic warriors, they swore an oath to their chief. Okay, and by doing that, they were then given gifts by the chief. Okay, it's the foundation, the cornerstone of their social system. Okay, it's the oath itself that forms the bond between them. Okay, and Michael Chernis says, all oaths are important in heroic society, but most important and most binding is the oath of loyalty to one's lord. This oath takes precedence over any oath which may conflict with it. Okay, so oaths are really, really important. Now, as we said, often the oath is sworn on a sword, usually the sword hilt. In Volundark, it's on the sword hilt. Can also be on a sword, ship, and horse, okay, as it is in Helga Vida Hundingsbana 1. Wedding oaths, as we talked about in the last video, were also sworn on swords. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, he records a Germanic tribe, says, then drawing their swords, which they venerate as gods, they swore that they would remain loyal. Okay, so swords again. Langobards and Danes have laws which say that some oaths should be sworn on weapons. In the history of the archbishops, Adam of Bremen says that the Danes swore on their weapons. So they had their own weapons and they're swearing oaths on their swords and things. Especially when they made peace. For instance, with Charles the Bold, with the Saxons, with the Irish, they would do this swearing on weapons, okay, for peace, basically. So oaths are sworn on swords. This, in some way, suggests that a sword could then turn back on them if they broke the oath. Okay, so it's sort of a sword being chosen because it symbolizes that if they break it, well, actually the sword will come back and hurt them. Not literally, maybe, but there will be some sort of punishment because of it. Oaths can also be made on stones. If they believed an oath taken on an earth-fast stone, that means a stone that's really heavy and stuck in the earth, was binding. For instance, in Heinz's Thoris Saga 12, Scandinavian kings would also often stand on an earth-fast stone for their coronation. And Gudrun, she swears her innocence on a white stone. Okay, there's an Odin stone in Orkney on which people again would swear oaths. That's not there anymore; it's got destroyed, unfortunately. But there was one there. So it could be on swords, it could be on stones. They also are recorded as swearing oaths on rivers, on a bronze bull, or a consecrated staff. And in fact, in the Germanic languages, the word for an oath is often oath staff, e.g. the Old English Athstaff. Okay. So oaths can be sworn on quite a lot of different things. Okay, you've got rings, you've got swords, you've got stones, you've got rivers and staffs and all sorts. And deities were often called on to witness these oaths. And there's even a goddess of oaths. Okay, that's how important it was. There's a goddess Var, one of the handmaidens of Frigg, who's a goddess of oaths. It says in Gylfaginning, she listens to the oaths and private agreements that are made between men and women. So this is sort of marriage oaths, basically. For this reason, such oaths are called varar. She takes vengeance on those who break trust. So breaking your oath can cause the gods and the goddesses to take vengeance on you. Okay, that's how important oaths were. Oaths are sworn on the oath ring by Freyr, by Njord, and the Almighty God, who is probably Thor. So this is in Landnámabók. Okay, it says that people basically, they would take the oath ring and they'd swear by these three gods their oath. So Freyr, Njord, and it says Almighty God, but it's probably, historians think, Thor is being referred to here. In Altakvitha, There's an oath ring called Ullr's ring. Okay, and Ullr is another god. So there's an oath being taken in his name. And in Gisla saga, there's 4 men who are swearing blood brotherhood. They also call on the gods to witness their oaths. So when you're taking an oath, you are holding a particular important sacred object that you're swearing on. And then you're also calling on the gods to witness that oath, okay? That's the sort of key parts to an oath, taking an oath. Now, there's examples, basically, of people in Germanic tribes who are not cutting their hair or their beard until they fulfill a certain oath, okay? You have religious rituals like the Sumbul, which we talked about, and the Sumbul ceremonies. They include making oaths. So the Old English, you've got Beot, the Old Norse heitstringing, which is binding oneself with basically to fulfill a vow. Okay, binding oneself to fulfill a vow. And that occurs in the Sumbul, the Beot part of the Sumbul. And there's also often a person there called a Thial who challenges that oath maker if it seems that they're making a really outrageous oath. And so they have basically can declare that it's not even a valid oath. Particularly say someone gets really drunk and makes this really stupid oath that you're going to do something the next day or destroy something or whatever, but it would either damage the community or the person, people just don't believe they can do it or whatever. This Thial person can stand up and say, actually, no, that's not an acceptable oath. You're not allowed to do that. So that's something that's part of the Sumbul ceremony. Okay. And actually, this Thial can demand the oath maker agrees to a shield, a debt payment, if the oath is broken. Okay, this is a sort of a protection thing that if they don't manage to carry out the oath, rather than it completely destroying everything, there's a payment made to sort of balance the books again, I suppose. Some heathens, and this is why it's so important, some heathens see the Sumbul cup as connected to the web of Weird. So when you're making an oath over it, you're basically speaking your oath directly into your, and often the group's, Weird. Okay, and this is why you might want a Thial that's going to challenge people's oaths in ceremony, because they're affecting the group's Weird. Okay, you're laying it literally into the well of Weird. Okay, so if it's something that will affect your luck, if you don't carry it out, that's going to affect and decrease your luck in your life. Now, some modern heathen groups, particularly the Theodish community, they expect you to take an oath when you join them. Okay, so that's another example of oaths being important. So it's really important when you're thinking about heathenry and oaths that you always keep your word. Okay, because reputation is important. You break your word, it damages your reputation and your trustworthiness. Okay, and trust is basically essential to community functioning well. Oaths are these bonds. Trust is this bond that brings community together and keeps it together. And if you're not keeping your oaths, if everyone's breaking their oaths and can't be trusted, community is not going to last very long. Because oaths are so very important, something completely sacred, in fact, you should treat it as that and be very, very careful about what you make an oath about, all right? And if you do make an oath, you'd better keep it, okay? Don't make oaths to gods or spirits because there's disastrous consequences if you break them. You can make them in the name of those gods and spirits, but if you're going to make an oath to the god and spirit, do not ever break them because of the disastrous consequences that can come. Now, an example of this, John's Vikings Saga 18. Men get drunk and they make some over-the-top oaths, basically. And they must then keep those oaths, but they weren't very careful when they did it. And because of that, because they must then keep them, a lot of them end up dead. Okay. That's a consequence of breaking oaths. Another consequence is Nastrond. So this is a place mentioned as a place of punishment in hell for murderers and oath breakers. And normally hell is seen as a nice place in the lore, but there is this one example, which is mentioned in Völuspá 36 and Regan's Mal 4 of Nastrond, which is where oath breakers will go to be punished if they break their oaths when they die. That said, even the gods sometimes break their oaths in the lore. For instance, Tyr or Tyr, and Odin and others. Okay, so oaths are important, but sometimes even the gods break them. Okay, so that was oaths, that was ethics, that was oaths. Now let's talk a little bit about living green. Why is environmentalism, why is green living an important part of paganism and heathenry? Okay, now obviously a lot of this is because in modern times has come in because the environmental movement has been very much intertwined with the pagan ideas, particularly from the 1960s and things like that. However, there's a lot of historical roots as well. Now, I'm not going to say that all the heathens in history were concerned about the environment. A lot of them probably were not. But we can find some foundation or ideas that help us to build an environmentalism and emphasize the importance of living green nowadays. Okay, so first thing is that the earth is seen as a goddess in heathenry, okay, in ancient times and nowadays. You've got the Nerthus, who Tacitus says is Mother Earth, and she's worshipped by the ancient Germanic tribes. You've got Jord, who's the goddess of the earth in the Norse pantheon, the Norse world. And then you've got Urca, and she's prayed to in an Anglo-Saxon charm, okay, and she's called Mother Earth. And importantly, Thor is seen as the son of the Mother Earth, okay. So he is going to want to protect his mother. So if you're honoring Thor in particular, he is very much going to be the god of environmentalism, and protecting his mother is going to be important to him, okay. Land spirits are also really important, okay. They are guardians of the land. As we've talked about throughout this course, is that the land does not belong to us first. It belongs to the land spirits first. Yes, we can take some of the land, but the land ultimately belongs to them. And we are guests on that land most of the time, okay. So we must treat it with respect, especially if we go out to somewhere that's wild in nature. Okay, the land spirits are the guardians. If we don't treat it respectfully, they're going to have something to say about it, and you'll probably find things happening in your life that you're not happy about because of it. Now, there's lots of ways to live environmentally friendly and green. Let's just go through a few of them, okay? So firstly, consumption and materialism. Consumption is really bad for the environment. When you're buying lots of stuff, it hurts the environment because it has to extract all these resources. And we should aim really to live lightly on the earth, to be more sort of minimalist and have fewer possessions than we need. So aim to buy less. If you need to buy things, aim to buy secondhand, okay? Use your charity shops, your thrift stores, places like that. Try to reuse and recycle things, upcycle things. Try to buy the least you possibly can, basically. Food. Now, it's more environmentally friendly to eat plant-based than it is to eat, so it's basically vegan or vegetarian, than it is to eat meat. So you may want to consider what you do with your diet, okay? And yes, even compared with eating locally grown meat, plant-based is still, from a carbon emissions point of view, still, and from a water use point of view, and from a land use point of view and stuff, it's better eating plant-based. But you'll have to make that decision for yourself on what you do. You may want to just do a bit of more plant-based and still eat some meat. It's up to you, ultimately. Eating organic is good because then you're not getting all these chemicals put into the ground and destroying life in the ground. Eating seasonally, so it tends to be cheaper, but also the food is going to be fresher. The food is going to be nicer, really, and it's more you're living in accord with Mother Nature, basically. You could consider growing your own food so that you're not paying for a lot of food to be imported with all the emissions that has, and with all the practices that you may not be happy with, like pesticides and stuff like that. And if you are going to do it yourself, don't use pesticides and things like that. There's also the issue of food waste. You don't want to be wasting food. So be careful what you buy, make lists, plan your meals, things like that. Now, energy is another thing to think about. Maybe you could switch to a green energy provider. Maybe you could install solar panels, or depending on the size of your land, maybe a small wind turbine. Think about using energy efficient light bulbs, but also turning light bulbs off when you lights off when you leave. Turn things off at the plug. Use energy efficient appliances, or buy energy efficient appliances when old ones run out. When it comes to travel, maybe you could go car free. Not everyone needs to have a car, so maybe you could do that, or you could car share, or you could choose to have an electric car. Okay, there are ethical implications on that as well, so consider that. Don't fly if you don't have to. Use public transport as much as possible. I mean, these are quite sensible things, but you're trying to live a more green life. Find ways of living lightly on the earth, basically. Water, you might want to check for leaks. A lot of water companies will provide free help for reducing your water usage. Install water meters, have shorter showers, be careful of the things that go down the toilets, like wet wipes and things like that can destroy the sewer system, but also anything that goes down there may well end up in our rivers. Fit low flow shower heads. There's loads of different things you can do to save water. Pollution, one of the big ones is plastic. So try reducing the amount of plastic you use. Okay, go zero waste, or work towards going zero waste as much as possible. That's getting reusable things, taking a water bottle with you, getting a bamboo toothbrush, using shampoo and soap pieces, not the plastic containers, things like that. And then expanding beyond that, what can you do to help the wildlife of the local area? Maybe you can support conservation charities with your money. And maybe if you've got a garden, you could think about wildlife gardening. So you can, there's lots you can do there. Put in a pond, leave piles of leaves and logs, plant lots of flowers that will be good for bees and butterflies. Put up bat houses and bird houses and things like that. So there's lots of things, plant trees, all that sort of stuff. So basically think about ways that you can live green, okay? And this is an ethical thing as well. You're supporting the earth, you're protecting the earth, you're pleasing Thor, you're being an ethical person, basically. Then you've got nature connection, okay? So it's important to look after the earth, but also to connect with the earth and with Mother Nature. So this isn't now about ethics so much. This is more about hobbies or lifestyle, or the way that you live and bring heathenry into your life. So being green is one way, the way you live. That is a way of bringing heathenry into your life and into your lifestyle. But also nature connection is another thing. One of the best ways of doing this is a sit spot. And a sit spot is basically a place you go in nature. It could just be your garden, it could be a local park, it could be local forest or something like that. And you go there ideally on a weekly basis and spend 15, 20, 30 minutes just sat there observing what's going on. You sit silently, you let nature move around you. You'll find actually is if you're in a place with not many other people, if you sit there for a while, nature becomes more confident and you might start to see interesting things happen. You also pay attention to what's happening around you and observe things through the seasons, and you could record them in your journal. And soon you'll have an understanding of how the local environment works over time. maybe buy a book of local folklore and local history, and that will help you to connect with your local land and with its spirits. So you might find that there are particular spirits or gods worshipped in your area, and you can connect with them and learn their stories. Tree and plant identification is another way to connect with nature. So get yourself a field guide for animals, for plants and things. Mobile apps, there's some really good mobile apps you can download for free, and you can use, like PlantNet is one I use. And you can go out for a walk maybe once a month. Basically, what I would suggest actually is you go out at least once a month, no more than 1 mile from your home, and learn to identify one new plant and one new tree. Okay, so over the space of a year, you'll have learned 12 new plants and 12 new trees. Okay, and you do it through the seasons, so you can see what things are out at that particular time in the season, and record that in your journal. And that's a way of really getting to know what grows on the land, what spirits are in the land. Okay, you could consider foraging. So once you know about the trees and the plants locally, then you can consider foraging for food. I mean, some things are more straightforward, like blackberries and things like that, but you'll probably find lots of other things you can forage as well. Take regular walks in nature. Okay, I mean, it's a good practice to go walking every day for a little bit of time. And if you've got some nature near you, particularly a park or a little forest or something like that, go there regularly. Forest bathing, this is a Japanese concept actually called Shinrin-yoku. And it's about being mindful and opening each of your senses up when you're within a forest. Okay, and you can there's some really good books about how to do this actually, so I recommend them. There's one mentioned at the end of this module. And you can basically, you become mindful in the forest, you enjoy the forest, you let it impact you, it reduces your stress, it helps your health, and it helps you connect with the forest, basically. Another way of nature connection is gardening, particularly growing your own food or growing flowers and things like that. If you use some of those things, you're sort of really starting to connect with your food and with nature on a very, very personal, local level. Try to eat seasonally so you understand that nature changes and how it changes. And also celebrate those seasonal changes. So maybe the equinoxes, the solstices, or particularly heathen festivals that are set at specific seasonal junctures. Celebrate those, because again, that keeps you in connection with nature and make the season and nature, the sort of changes that are going on within nature at that time, part of those celebrations. And decorate indoors with seasonal objects. So you might want to put, say in autumn, for instance, you might want to put pine cones and leaves and dried leaves and things like that out on an altar, or dried flowers, or in spring you might want to put some bulbs and things in a pot, or herbs in summer, that sort of thing. Okay, decorate indoors with seasonal objects. So that's how you can connect more with nature. And then there's loads and loads of other hobbies as well that you could do. So we're going to talk about it in a minute, but you can brew mead, okay, or in the next video. You can brew mead or ale or beer or cider or wine, or sort of brewing is a really good hobby. There's board games like the Hnafatafl, which is a Viking board game from Viking times. You can see it in the top right there, a picture of some people playing it. So you can do board games that are about heathenry. You could write poems. Poetry was a really important practice in heathenry. You've got genealogy, explore your genealogy, find out about your ancestors. Spinning and weaving, like for instance, lucid weaving. You can see the picture with the red thread there. That's doing lucid weaving, which is really easy, but you can actually take it much more complicated if you want. Woodworking and whittling or blacksmithing are hobbies you could do. These are ones that your ancestors would have done in times past. Again, with the spinning and weaving is the same. Martial arts, particularly if you're devoted to one of the more war-like gods or goddesses. You can learn martial arts. LARPing, which is live action role playing. You can see a picture in the bottom, sort of towards the center there, of people dressed up, and then they have a story, and they take on a character and they act it out basically in real life. Food, you can consider the type of food you cook. Was it food from a Viking age? There's plenty of cookbooks out there now for Viking and Anglo-Saxon cooking. You can do gardening. You can do reading of the heathen books that we're recommending in this course. There's also other books, like if you like fiction, there's actually now lots of books set in Anglo-Saxon or Viking times that are heathen. You can listen to music. There's lots of musicians out there. Wardrun, Highlung, Walken's Men, and others like that all have heathen music. There's too many to list, basically. There's just loads and loads of options now. You could take on magical practices and learn how to do them. So you could learn about the runes, you could learn how to do Galdr or Sather and things like that. Okay, so there's lots of different ways of bringing heathenry into your life through your hobbies. Okay, so and listening to heathen music and all that sort of stuff. Watching heathen TV programs. You could watch the Vikings series, which the Barbarians series is another one. Be aware that they're not necessarily historically accurate, but they're good fun to watch. So we talked about your ethics. We talked about connecting with nature, living a life that's green, having hobbies that are either stuff that was done in the past by heathens or are inspired by heathenry today. Now, there's another concept, which this is a modern concept. This does not go back to the Viking times. However, the idea probably would be recognizable to ancient heathens. And that's this idea of hygge. Okay. Now, this is a Danish word, so it's coming from Scandinavian nations. Okay. It doesn't have a clear meaning in English, but it sort of means coziness and togetherness. Okay. And there's a book called The Little Book of Hygge, which I recommend you get. There's actually lots of books about hygge out there now, but this one was one of the first ones. And it says, hygge is about an atmosphere and an experience, rather than about things. It is about being with the people we love, a feeling of home, a feeling that we are safe, that we are shielded from the world and allow ourselves to let our guard down. Okay. It's about being by a cozy fire, drinking hot chocolate, eating warm stew, wrapped in a comfy blanket, surrounded by people we love. That sort of feeling, that's what hygge is. Especially, it's really good if you think about the autumn and the winter times. That's when you really have a hygge feeling. It's about an atmosphere of candles or a fireplace or dim lighting, spending time with family and friends, about being warm and cozy and having a feast of good food on the table. Okay. It's a feeling of community, of intimacy, of coziness, of warmth and togetherness. Okay, that is hygge. It's about comfort and harmony. Your phones are off, you're sharing your pleasure. And the reason why it's become sort of a really big thing recently is because it's Denmark is basically the happiest nation in the world, according to various polls and things. Okay. And it's also about the fact that Scandinavian countries are always have really got cold winter. How do they get through it and yet still be the happiest people on the planet? Well, it's this idea of hygge. Okay. They are happy because they know how to hygge. Okay. Coziness, spending time together, that sort of thing. So, although it's a modern idea, you could argue that in the heathen past, they would have lived in these small huts with a fireplace and spent their time together in the winter and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you can do it throughout the year, but it's very much a hygge type atmosphere, probably. despite all the horrible things going on around and outside and all that rest of it. Okay, so maybe adopt this as, especially in the autumn and winter times, into your life. And then there's finding community. Okay, so you'll often hear that heathenry is about community. Okay, you can practice it alone, and it's very possible to be heathen on your own, but often it's better with others. Okay, so if you're at home, maybe you try to involve your families in your rituals if they're open to it. If you want to go online, there's lots of online groups. There's Asatru UK, there's the England Heathenship, there's the Nordic Animism, there's Skithbladnir, there's Volva Rose. There's quite a few different Discord groups that you can use. There's Facebook groups, okay? In the UK, that's Asatru UK and the Confederation of Heathens. But you've also got other Facebook groups which are more worldwide, like Fern Sidhu, which is about Anglo-Saxon heathenry, and just normal Fern Sidhu. There's Oud Sidhu, which is about Saxon heathenry, which is more sort of continental Germanic. You've got Nordic Animism, you've got the Heathen Underground community, you've got Heathen Scholarship, you've got Academic Asatru and Heathenry. These are all Facebook groups that you could think about joining and learning more about heathenry and getting into community with people. And those are the ways, basically, of adopting heathenry into your life. So through rites of passage, through ethics, through nature connection and living a green life, through your hobbies, through hygge, through community, all these sorts of ways you can make heathenry more than just your religion. You can make it your lifestyle as well. And in our last video in this module, we're going to talk about how to brew mead. Okay, and this is going to be important because you may want to use mead as an offering in your rituals. Thank you very much.